In this screencast, I'm going to be talking about two other types of selection, or two other ways that evolution can happen besides natural selection. So we learned in natural selection is selection in favor of being better adapted to an environment, or being better suited to survive and live in a certain environment. So let's just look at these birds. These are some different tropical birds, and notice they've got these crazy bright colors, long tail feathers, long feathers, lots of feathers. And so my question is, looking at these pictures, do you think that these feathers and colors help the bird to survive? And by that I just mean, do you think it would help, like say, this individual bird to not die, to have this bright red feathers and this long tail, or for this bird to have these bright green feathers? Is that going to help them survive and be better adapted to their environment? And the answer to that is no. They've done studies where they take some of those birds that have the really long tail feathers, for example, and they cut their tail feathers short, and they find that the birds who don't have the crazy long tail feathers survive better. They're able to fly better, and they're less likely to get eaten by a predator. Same with the coloring. You're more able to blend in if you don't have all these bright colors. So why does this happen? Well, it turns out that some traits are selected for not because they help the individual survive, but because they help attract a mate. So we know this as sexual selection. Basically, survival is nice, but to pass on traits, you've got to make babies. You've got to pass those on to the next generation. So you could be the survivinist bird out there and just, live a really long life, but if nobody wants to mate with you, you can't pass on your genes. And so your traits are not going to be passed on to the next generation. We see this kind of thing a lot, like I said, in birds. Of course, the peacock is a great example. Like, those tail feathers are not helping it outrun any predators, but they are helping it attract a mate. You can also see this in different species that have different mating calls or mating dances that, again, put them at risk of potentially attracting a predator, but help them to attract a mate. Behaviors like males fighting over mates, like buffaloes or deer, that kind of thing, elk fighting with their antlers, which puts the male in danger of dying. He could be killed by the other male. But again, evolution works because genes are getting passed on to the next generation. And so sexual selection will select for those traits that are going to get passed on to the next generation, even though they're not necessarily helping the organism to survive. Another way evolution can happen is what's known as artificial selection. So this is when humans come in and influence the direction of evolution of a species, of a population, for our own use. So we can call this intentionally breeding for certain traits, or selective breeding. So anything that people farm or eat or have as pets, or any kind of livestock, those things have all been influenced by artificial selection. So cows, for example, have been bred to produce dramatically more milk than they would just in their natural state. We've bred the cows that produce the most milk. Apples used to be these sort of small, sour little fruits, and now that we have these big, sweet apples and all different kinds of varieties, our pets have been bred to be more tame and more friendly. Also, sometimes we'll breed them for certain traits, like this is a Scottish fold cat. There was a mutation where it had these little folded down ears, and people thought it was cute, and so continued breeding them, and now we have cats that have ears like this. So again, none of these are traits that would help these to survive in the wild. In fact, most of these species would not survive now in the wild without human intervention. They are traits that have been bred intentionally by people so that they can help us. So how does this work? Here, this picture is a wild pig, a wild feral pig, and they are, pretty scrawny, not nearly as much meat on them compared to our domestic pigs that are bred for meat. And you might say, well, this pig, got fed more, or maybe it got given some kind of hormones or something to make it that big. But I promise you, you could feed this pig as much as you want and, give it whatever you want, and it is never going to be as big and full of fat and meat as this pig. So, how did we get from these pigs on the left to these pigs on the right? You can pause for a minute, try to come up with sort of a plan. What would you do? So it's pretty simple. We observe that big pigs produce more bacon, and bacon is delicious. So then people only breed the biggest pigs. So if you have, a group of pigs, a litter of pigs, you're only going to breed the biggest, fattest pigs, and the smaller pigs, you are not going to breed them or allow them to breed. And then in the next generation, once again, you're only going to breed the biggest pigs. And then again and again and again over many, many, many generations. And over time, our average pig size is increasing and increasing and increasing. And eventually, we have big, fat pigs that give us a lot of bacon. Another great example of artificial selection is dogs. All dogs come from wolves. So the original dog is a wolf. It looks like this. But we have so many different types of dogs that all look very different because humans have been living with dogs and interacting with dogs for a long time. And so we've had a long time to artificially select for traits that we like in dogs. Not only tameness, but also, like, maybe there was a mutation and one had spots and we thought that looked pretty cool, so we continued breeding for that. Or maybe you wanted to breed a smaller dog, so you only bred the smallest dogs, or a bigger dog, or a dog that was really good at smelling and, getting into holes of animals to hunt for them. Whatever those traits are, we've bred many different breeds of dogs artificially to create all of these different types of dogs. Now, these dogs are still all the same species. They can still mate with each other, but they look very different because of artificial selection. So, one practice question, pick one, either the cow producing milk, the apple, or the cat, and try to explain sort of step by step, how did it get one of its current traits through artificial selection.